Good morning. I am Debbie Shadd, President of the Cohasset Conservation Trust, and I am here at one of our newer properties, Garrison Landing on King Street on the edge of Lily Pond, with two of our directors, Dick Avery, who has been our long-term treasurer, and Katie Holden, one of our relatively newer directors, who is currently our secretary. And we'd like to introduce you to reintroduce some of you to the Cohasset Conservation Trust and the properties which we own in Cohasset. We currently own 24 properties and hold a conservation restriction on 3 additional properties for a total protected acreage of about 217 acres in Cohasset, Scituate, and 1 property in Hull. This is a map of our properties. It gives you a rough idea. The properties are marked all around town. We cover pretty much the whole town. This is one of our newest properties, donated in 2017. And we'd like to introduce you a little bit to the challenges we face with respect to stewardship of our properties and financial issues associated with trying to maintain all these properties before we take you on a driving tour of properties in Cohasset. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dick and Katie to talk a little bit about stewardship and financial issues.
Okay, well, many of our properties have trails on them so that the public can walk through them and enjoy the variety of environments that all these properties encompass within Cohasset, which by nature has so many different features of natural history, whether it's ponds or forest or meadows, creeks, you name it, we have it. And to maintain those trails, we use a couple of methods. One is we hire people. For instance, this property was covered with poison ivy, so we hired Poison Ivy Pete, who came in with his son, and they ripped out all the poison ivy. But once they've done that, as you know from this summer in your own gardens, things grow, and they grow fast. So we maintain the trails in a couple of ways. Katie and I will show you some of the tools we use, but it's not just work that we as board members perform, it's work that individuals that are not official members of the trust can do, and we'll show you about that. I might point out that Katie also is involved with the Quest program, South Shore Quest, is that? Which makes it very interesting and exciting to get around these properties. I think in Europe, what do they call it?
Yeah, they call it letterboxing in Europe. In one town in England, there's 10,000 of these letterboxes or quests, and we're just beginning to bring them to Cohasset, and it's really fun with the kids. It makes a hike more enjoyable for everyone.
Sort of a treasure hunt, if you will. And for the smaller kids, there's a true treasure at some of these trails, which we'll leave as a surprise for you to discover. So if we could step over to our tool shed.
Each of our properties has a steward from the Cohasset Conservation Trust Board, and they're responsible for helping to maintain the properties, which is a lot of work. And so we are looking for neighbors, abutters, anyone interested in helping out. And as Dick and I will go over some of the activities that are needed to maintain. Especially in Ingram, we found abutters have been very helpful in letting us know of any issues and if trees are down and that type of thing. So.
Well, Katie is holding 2 simple tools that any of you could take with you on a hike. One is a pair of yard clippers. Things grow over the trail, and as you walk along, a quick snip, and that keeps it open for others. The other is plastic bags for picking up trash, tin cans, cigarette butts, whatever you find. We certainly expect people walking their pets to carry bags for the animal waste. But then for larger jobs, usually a board member will come out with a pair of loppers for getting some of your thicker growths, saplings, tree limbs that drop down and cross the trail. And then occasionally we bring out the heavy artillery, which are the chainsaw crew. Several of us have chainsaws, and when we hear that a tree is down or threatening a trail, we'll pull these machines out and keep the trail clear.
And weed whackers are also very useful.
Well, we don't expect you to carry those on a hike. That's if you're in a butter and can easily do that.
And I should mention that occasionally we have a tree especially down which is too large for us to handle, and we have on occasion had to hire a tree company to come in and remove a very large tree that's completely blocking the trail or threatening a neighboring property. So that can be quite a large expense for the trust.
A good example of that was in Great Brewster Woods, where we had some trees that were at least 2 feet in diameter. That was beyond our ability. Another way to help maintain our trails is to make sure that your landscaper or gardener or lawnmower company doesn't dump the grass clippings on our property. You know, it's who knows who owns it. Well, we own it, and that's a major headache when some I won't call it the abutters themselves, but the people they hire to
And that also spreads invasive plants, which we also are trying to control, such as bittersweet, Japanese barberry, black swallowwort, that type. Garlic mustard has been very well known in town now, and so that's another maintenance issue that costs takes a lot of time and effort.
And maybe one final tool that we use for maintaining our properties are your checkbooks. Simply writing a check, doesn't matter the amount. It can cover our expenses for maintaining equipment, hiring people, and in some instances, we pay to have the boundaries marked and to put up signs, which is sort of a forgotten part of maintaining properties. But it's to keep a legal standing in case there's encroachment, and it's also to invite the public to come visit these sites. So that's so many different ways that the town can support our efforts to support the town in providing these jewels of properties.
We do a annual fundraising mailing towards the end of the year in November, and we hope that many of you will consider helping us and becoming involved by making a contribution to protect the places you're about to see during the tour.
We have a website, and we're on Facebook, and every other week at the farmers market we have a table, so feel free to come down and during that spring, summer, and fall season and ask us questions and find out more about where our properties are.
So let's go.
Okay, hope you enjoy the tour.
Oh.
Right there. So I think I usually park in here. I'm sure people aren't wild about it, but no, sure. We're standing near 393 South Main Street, and we're looking across to this large marsh in front of you, and you see the kind of forested tip of land and then the marsh goes around the corner to the left. And this basically represents 2 properties that the Conservation Trust owns. The largest one is Pegram Preserve, which is 14 3/4 acres of salt marsh and upland on the Gulf River. The wooded section you see belongs to Pegram. This was a property we purchased in 1999. It was our first purchase since Bassing Beach, which was our very first property in 1968. And this was purchased to provide wildlife habitat and to protect this area of the river, the marsh, the views from the river, and especially enjoyed by people kayaking on the river or also from here. It was a buildable lot, threatened by development, and we had been left a bequest that was left specifically to protect land along the Gulf River. So this was an opportunity to use that bequest, and there were also donations made to cover the remainder of the purchase. Just beyond Pegram, sort of around the corner, is a property called Dormitzer Salt Marsh, which is another 4.7 acres. And that was the gift of Julia Dormitzer in 1990. And that also, again, protects the marsh and the views of this area from the river.
I'd say two things we want to point out is it's so important to have contiguous properties so that you have a mass of either marsh or forest. It's not just a checkerboard, but pieces that create actually a viable environment. And the second thing I think to point out is the donations from the abutting homeowners were not insignificant. They were thousands of dollars. And we could not do all of this acquisition and preservation without generous abutters and other donors.
Right, but the real beauty of the property is when it's viewed from the water. And I don't know if you want to try to film this, but this would give you a sense of where we are. We're standing here on South Main Street looking at Pegram and Dormitzer, which is this entire section of the water, of the marsh here. And then kind of across the street and back that way would be our Ingram property.
So I was just going to point out that just down the road is the former, but still standing, Mordecai Lincoln grist mill.
You can, park on that side of the road up here. There's a pull off. Yeah.
Debbie, we're out here right at the end of Parker Avenue and Border Street, looking out at one of our more magnificent properties, Supper Island. Tell us a little about how we got here.
Okay, well, I'll say right off the bat, we don't own this property, but we do hold a conservation restriction on it. This is a map that shows the property. You've probably seen it a million times if you've looked this way or if you've kayaked on the Gulf River. It's a very prominent landmark on the Gulf River. And it is about 7.5 acres of land, separated by a very small ditch from the mainland off a property at the end of Black Horse Lane. The conservation restriction that we hold on the island will protect it from development or basically any significant human alteration in perpetuity. And this was a gift of Cornelia Barnard in her will. And as I say, it's a major feature of the Gulf River. There's a lot of wildlife that you'll see around here. And it's enjoyed by kayakers and people walking by here.
How do you get out other than by kayak? Or do you not?
There's no public access from the land. We have the right to use an easement through the private property, which is beyond it, which includes the Red Barn, the large gray colonial house, and there may be more development back there. We have an easement through there to monitor the property to make sure there is no development. And the public has the right to go on to the first 50 feet of the shoreline along this edge, along the river edge, if you wanted to stop, sit for a minute. Right now it's sort of low tide, but at a higher tide, the water goes right up to where you see the rocks. There's almost a stone wall around the property.
So about the first 50 feet, you said?
50 feet, there's public access for people to stop if they're interested.
And you can actually have supper on Supper Island.
You could have supper on Supper Island.
There you go.
We are an all-volunteer board, as Mark well knows. We have 11 directors. We increased from 9 a few years ago, so we have a board of 11 directors who do most of the work to run the trust and maintain our properties.
Well, looks like we've arrived at Sumner Smith Overlook. Let's take a look.
Okay. So this is one of our smaller properties. It's an acre of land. This would be a good place to talk about our signs. This is most of our properties. We have a couple that aren't marked for various reasons, but most of our properties are marked with this uniform green and white sign with our logo down here and our website listed and the name of the property, and frequently a little phrase asking people to please avoid dumping on our properties, which is a problem, particularly with certain properties. And maybe Mark could tell us a little bit more about this particular property.
Well, first of all, the property is located on Beach Street. You know where I live. It's right down the street from me, towards the water on my side. And as we can swing the camera over, we'll show you this. As Debbie said, it's a small property, but there's a path here, and you kind of go up, and it's called an overlook because that's what it is. You're up on top of the rock, and looking out over to Little Harbor. It is a bit seasonal there, but you can get some good views. It is about 1 acre, and it was a gift from the will of Sumner Smith, who actually was one of our former trustees. We obtained this property in 1997. So it is, if you're walking along Beach Street and you want to get up, it takes a few minutes. You can't get lost. You're guaranteed you cannot get lost. It's too small, but it is very nice, and a little respite from all of the homes and the yards and so forth that are come sprouting out around us.
And it is a very short trail, but it is marked with our signature triangular yellow trail markers. There's a few markers to make sure you curve to the left at the right point and go up to the top of the ledge. And in the winter, especially when the leaves are down, it's a pretty view.
Even though it's small, and maybe we should mention this now, you always be aware of ticks. Unfortunately, we do a lot. There's a lot we can do, but we can't do too much about ticks. So wear the proper clothing, the spray, and so forth, and be careful and check yourself after, so you can fully enjoy all of the beautiful properties that we have without getting some horrible disease.
And I did want to briefly show you how this small property, which doesn't connect directly to any other properties, but it's very close to Great Brewster Woods and Dean's Meadow, which we toured the other day. This is the town common down here. This is where we are. And we also have a property called the Blake Holmes property, which is off Meadow Lane. Once again, it's a bit of an isolated property, but it protects woods just off Atlantic Avenue and Meadow Lane. And all these properties are fairly close together, and there are some topography that they share in common, some streams and ledges. You can kind of see how, when you really look at a map like this, you can see that there's, between town-owned land and conservation land, there's a fair number of properties that are protected that are fairly close together. This is the So we are standing at the sign for our Giugio Overlook Conservation Area, which is at the town end of Jerusalem Road. If you look at this map, this is the beginning of Jerusalem Road. There's a town-owned parcel right here. We're at Giugio Overlook here. All this marsh is owned by the town, and then the Conservation Trust owns a marsh and upland property down at near the intersection of Joy Place and Gammons Road. And I thought our director, Dick Avery, could tell you a little more about this property.
Well, the overlook portion of this property was donated by John and Barbara Giugio in 1993, about 15 years ago. And the view has been maintained. You can see from here down into the marshland, over Joy Place, and then into Little Harbor. And on the left edge of the view is the Remmick property, That's a 1.5 acres. We'll be going by there in a few minutes to see it from ground level. That's 1.5 acres. This is a 1/2 acre, so between the two we have 2 acres of protected land. And this is critical habitat for all of aquatic life. And you'll see not just small fish in the waters, but you'll see the egrets and the herons fishing in the waters here. Just as a point of interest, the Remmick family that donated the far shore here is the same Remmick family that owned the department store in Quincy and who had the famous movie actress Lee Remmick. So, small town of Cohasset has some famous parts of the history.
And another little interesting piece, our very first Earth Day cleanup with the boys lacrosse team and some other volunteers about 10 years ago, I think, was one of our properties that we cleaned up was Giugio, and it's very steep. And the team crawled around this entire hillside and picked up an unbelievable amount of trash and interesting objects that have been thrown over the brink here over the years. So this is one of the properties that made us decide that we should ask people not to dump on our signs.
And I might just add that the no dumping is a real issue for us on our properties.
Lower section.
Yeah.
So this is a very pretty view.
Do you want me to pull up here? Or
Yeah,
set
I'd
it
say
back
just pull up here and we can walk back quickly. So this is the land we just talked about. This is Remmick Salt Marsh. We're on Joy Place now. We normally have a sign here where this post is, but that came down during one of the winter storms and we need to remount it. This is 1.5 acres of land that goes up this hillside here to where the houses start and then down into the marsh. So both sides of the road. And it was the gift of Dorothy Remmick in 2011. And as Dick mentioned earlier, it's part of a long protected stretch of marshland in this area between town-owned land and Conservation Trust land. And we'll walk around the corner here. There's a very pretty view that many of you may recognize, looking down into the marsh from the little bridge up here. On the corner, now we're on Gammons Road, looking at the property, which is basically to the left here. The town-owned property would be to the right. This is a pretty spot. If you're ever walking through this area, I've seen multiple egrets standing along the banks here. It's beautiful in the fall. The grasses get a little reddish. Beautiful in the spring when they're really bright green. It's just a very pretty view. And right now it's beautiful with this white cloud and the reflection in the stream. So we're heading down Jerusalem Road. We are going to be able to see our newest property, which will be known as Steinmetz Wildlife Reserve on James Island, because the purchase was not all of James Island, but the boot of James Island. Got a map ready to go here. So we're heading down Jerusalem Road, and we'll be able to see the shoreline of Steinmetz Wildlife Reserve at the foot of James Island. This entire piece of land is known as James Island, so it's off in there. Some of the green you see on the far shore is this. It's a 5-acre parcel of ledge and woods on Inner Little Harbor. It was purchased just this past July with funding that was donated for this project. And it protects a pristine parcel of undeveloped land and the view shed of that land from Atlantic Avenue and Jerusalem Road. And it's the area known as James Island, which does include some homes, is directly across from another Conservation Trust property, which I wonder if we should park and
Sumner, 3 years old.
oh really? There's been some great ones, but I think we'll go out.
Yeah. All right, we're now at our next property. This is Scott's Shore. So to orientate you, starts up, if you're coming down Atlantic Avenue toward Jerusalem Road, right at the causeway, the beach down, the beach, rocky beach there, starts there. This is all Scott's Shore, all the way up to the Sherbrooks property, which if you know it, is really the first house. So it's 0.3 acres. I mean, no, how big is it?
3 acres.
3 acres.
3 acres.
3 acres of property, and it's really, as the town we lose more and more sight lines of our shore. Seems like every year. We're not going to lose this one. Conservation Trust bought it. This will always be here, so you'll always have views coming down right at the end of Atlantic Avenue of the ocean. And while we're standing here on the beach, unfortunately, you can't. This is one of the few properties that the trust owns that public access is prohibited. And there's a reason for that. And that is the nesting that takes place here through a great part of the year. We don't want to disturb at all. And that's really the reason, right, Debbie?
Yes, and there is a deed restriction protecting this land just for the wildlife and the shorebirds that nest here in the rocks. This was the gift of Catherine Scott in 2 different pieces. There are 2 actual pieces of the beach in 1971, and then the second piece she gave to us in 1990. This has been the subject of a number of cleanups over the years, again with volunteer groups. The entire 9th grade from the high school came here for several falls in a row during the Coast Sweep cleanup program run by the state, and cleaned up a lot of debris that washes up here every year. We've had some pretty large and interesting things wash up here. They've helped us clean that up. And about 2 years ago, we had a small group of students from MIT come and do a study of the ecosystem of a rocky beach, which this is. It does have stretches of sand, but it's very rocky, and that supports a whole different type of ecosystem than a very sandy beach does. You'll notice there's quite a few flowering plants that grow toward the back of the beach that are very different in look from Sandy Beach, for instance. So it's a beautiful property. If you've ever gone by in a boat, you'll be able to see this kind of a crescent-shaped beach here that will always look like this.
Right, it's certainly one of our more unique and maybe even important properties, again, to preserve at least a piece of the shoreline for Cohasset. Okay.
So we just drove down Jerusalem Road. We're at the intersection of, is this Linden?
Linden.
Drive, yep.
Linden Drive. And on the right, you'll see what you probably recognize as Black Rock Beach. But what you may not know is that this end of Black Rock Beach, after this house, this is a private bathhouse or boathouse and little beach, but just beyond it, beginning with those rocks there, this first section of Black Rock Beach is a Conservation Trust property called Francis Shore. It's just 0.3 acres, and it was the gift of John and Loretta Francis in 1985, and it directly abuts Black Rock Beach. And we'll continue driving now to the end of Cohasset on Jerusalem Road, and as soon as we go over into Hull, we'll visit our next property, which is Windsor Shores in Hull. So we're approaching Straits Pond, and right around the corner here is our Windsor Shores property. There's a small, right here, there's a small parking area and a kiosk, which needs a little repair after the winter. Windsor Shores is 0.84 acres in Hull, directly on Straits Pond, and it was donated by the Windsor family in 2005. Although the Conservation Trust had to pay for an appraisal of the property and various costs associated with the closing, so that gives you a sense of the types of costs that we incur every year to acquire property, even when it's donated. The property actually includes a small slice of shoreline all the way up to the very first house on Atlantic Avenue in Hull. So it's a very narrow stretch, but there's a tiny arm that goes all the way up to the very first house. This kiosk here, which has information about Straits Pond, the history of Straits Pond, the history of the Black Rock Hotel, which was in this area, was built by a local Boy Scout for his Eagle Scout project. It needs to be shorn up a little bit. And then there's a memorial stone bench a little further down toward the water that acknowledges the Windsor family's parents for whom this property was donated. Even though the property is just 0.4 acres, it does open up the 93-acre Straits Pond area to kayakers or paddleboarders. You're welcome to come here. If you park carefully, 2 or 3 cars at least can fit in here. You can walk down a short path to Straits Pond and paddle all the way around Straits Pond, or use your paddleboard, or just walk down and take a look. It can be a lovely view at sunset, looking down this way. And you might be interested to know that part of the reason this property was donated to us is that the Hull Land Conservation Trust, which does now exist, did not exist in 2005, and the family wanted to protect the land, and so they approached our former president, Gary Vanderweil, about donating this to the Cohasset Conservation Trust. So this is our only property in Hull at this point. And as I say, it's our only property on Straits Pond, and one of our only properties that you can easily kayak from on a body of water. So we hope some of you take advantage of that opportunity.
Great.
Okay, so we are approaching the intersection of Route 3A and Pond Street. The Conservation Trust owns 2 properties right at this intersection. We'll drive by our Adams property first. Now they'll be coming up on the right after the Esposito Nursery property. It's 5 1/4 acres of heavily wooded land, which was donated by the Adams brothers in 1999. So it starts roughly here. We have a sign you'll see here, and then it goes roughly down to Mendel Road. You can take a left on Mendel Road. It protects the Lily Pond watershed, with part of Peppermint Brook flows through here. And it also just provides some green space along Route 3A. So when you're driving along Route 3A and there's sections that are very built up and very developed looking, you know, this is a stretch that is not so built up, that gives your eye a little rest. It goes almost all the way back over to King Street. There's a row of houses on the other end, but it is 5 acres between here and King Street So that was Adams. Now we're heading back to the intersection, and we'll stop briefly at a property called Campbell Meadow, which is 3 3/4 acres, and that's bisected by Peppermint Brook, which is a tributary to the Lily Pond. It flows directly into Lily Pond, and that was donated by Daniel and Ann Campbell in 1991. And you may have noticed it over the years. It's a true meadow. I'm not quite sure what the grass or grasses within it are, but it is a meadow. We don't do anything to maintain it as a meadow. There's a small row of bushes along the street, but the main property, which you'll see in a minute, maintains itself as a meadow. Up to the other tree line that stays low beyond these bushes along the street. We have a sign here. And it can be very pretty at certain times of year, especially. The grasses can look very beautiful. It goes all the way down here. There are a few trees in there, but most of the grasses stay low. And now we're heading up Pond Street to Lily Pond. When we get to Lily Pond, realized I marked this wrong. Directly ahead of us will be the water department. And I'll correct this, but what I have marked as Garrison Landing here is actually a town-owned parcel of land right here. This property here, next to Garrison Landing, next to this town-owned property, is called Garrison Landing. This is also one of our newest properties. It's 1 acre. It's directly on Lily Pond. It was the gift of Nancy Garrison's children in 2017. Nancy lived in the next house. If you pull up, there's a little place you can pull up near the path.
Right up here.
Yep. Yep, right up here. And this is an interesting property for many reasons. As you can see, it's directly on Lily Pond. We've cleared a small path that goes down to Lily Pond. There was a significant amount of poison ivy and other invasive plants, which we had to hire someone to help remove, another maintenance expense. But there is a path now down to Lily Pond. You can kayak from here on Lily Pond. You can just appreciate the view. You can ice skate. Last winter, people ice skated from here on Lily Pond. And also, interestingly, these stone walls that you see here, you'll see a little bit of it down there, and there's more of them in the woods down here. These are the remains of the Souther Ice House business, which was a 19th century business of two quite large buildings. And this was an ice business, so they would cut large blocks of ice from Lily Pond, bring them over to these storage sheds, cover them with sawdust that would keep them frozen, and then during the entire rest of the year when there was no ice, they would cut chunks of ice and deliver them to people's houses to put in their ice boxes before the days of refrigeration to keep people's food cold. There were at least 2 or 3 ice businesses in Cohasset, but these, as far as I know, this is really the only remains of it. The other thing I wanted to show you from this property is a property that we own. This is Lily Pond, and over here is a property called Andrus Island, which connects to a property we own called Wheelwright Highlands, and a property we own which we'll drive by on Beechwood Street, quite a large property called the Barbara Churchill Conservation Area. All of these properties there is high ground, but there's also a lot of marsh. But if you look over here, you're looking at Andrus Island, which is, our part of Andrus Island is about 3.5 acres, and it's this kind of high area you see here. We own part of it, and this part is owned by the town. And there's actually some lovely wooded sections with some trails that have been built by people over the years. Currently, it's really only accessible to the public by water, so you could kayak over to there, tie up your kayak and walk around on the property. We're working on some options to create some sort of public access from King Street probably to be able to get people over there, and a few neighbors over time have allowed us to do a tour over there. But it's actually a very beautiful piece of property that's very remote feeling. And as I say, I'll hold this right side up, but it connects to quite a bit of other conservation property and other property owned by the town, and even Wampatuck State Park over here. So there's quite a bit of protected land back in that area, off to this side of Beechwood Street down there, and then all along Lily Pond. I don't know where the easiest.
You mean the one that took forever?
Can you?
Probably put it right here.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm walking this way.
Should we get out? Do you think?
Sure.
Might be nice to get out. We've just driven down Beechwood Street to the dam that was rebuilt at Bound Brook within the last couple of years. So we're standing here looking out at the Barbara Churchill Conservation Area, which is 5 acres of marsh donated by Thomas and Celeste Churchill in 1985. Obviously, it protects Bound Brook and Herring Brook, and it directly abuts Wheelwright Highlands, also one of our newer properties to this side. That's 4.5 acres of upland and marsh that was donated to us by local resident Dusty Wheelwright in 2015. And again, Wheelwright Highlands abuts Andros Island, which we were just looking at from Lily Pond. So all this land in here is owned by the Cohasset Conservation Trust. Not easily accessible from land right now, but again, it's something we're working on. And one of the things that we love about this is the way these properties connect. So originally we just had the Churchill property, but now with these 2 properties and then Andros abutting town-owned property, this entire section of land is protected between town-owned properties and Conservation Trust-owned properties. And you can sort of see from the topographical map where the high areas are. Much of this is marsh, which was flooded when the dam was first built. But again, if you're driving by, there's an area you can pull off here, and it can really be a lovely view at higher tide. Right now, not tide, but right now the water is quite low. But when the water levels are higher, it can be a beautiful view down into the real wild land down toward Lily Pond. This is our entering kiosk. In the kiosk, we have a simple map of the trail system that was created by 3 or 4 different Boy Scouts for their Eagle Scout projects, and the entire kiosk was also an Eagle Scout project. So you have a trail that explains roughly where you'll go, and some information about the quest, and information about Lyme disease and the need to protect yourself from ticks. And this is a recognition for Adam Benson, who created the kiosk. Walking on the trail system and the initial boardwalks across the wetlands that were created as an Eagle Scout project. And the trail is marked with triangular yellow blazes. And we have a quest feature.
Here's one of the first fairy doors that if you go on the treasure hunt, you will come across various fairy doors and fairies. This is the poison ivy fairy, who you will get to meet, along with some cards about how to identify poison ivy, which is always important when you go on a trail walk. And here we happen to have 2 forms of poison ivy. We have the vine, which not many people are as aware of. So if you look, it's been cut here, but if you look along here, you will see a lot of poison ivy attached to the trees, not on the trail, because we removed that. And poison ivy is very significant for wildlife, and for especially songbird migration. They depend on the food source, like high up in the trees, eating the berries as part of their migration. So anyway. Alright, so as part of the quest, this quest is called Magical Creatures, and you're going to be finding some fairies and some surprises along the way. It also focuses on how to identify black birch and the magic of black birch. And here we have a black birch tree, and it's been labeled as part of the quest, and we have a yellow birch, so you'll learn the difference. The yellow birch has the small little peels on it, and you can see how smooth the black birch is. Black birch is also known as a rescue tree. So if you are lost in the woods and you know that if you drink the water you may get sick because of the bacteria, you can poke a hole in this tree and you can drink the sap that comes out. You can also make black birch syrup from it, simple as the sugar maple. And the twigs smell like wintergreen. It's a really great tree. So you'll learn if you go on the quest, you'll learn about more.
So this might be a good place to talk about the stone walls, which are all over this property. So we just crossed through a stone wall, and all of these walls are evidence of the past use of the property in the 17 and 1800s when people were farming here, maybe grazing animals here, and they needed to dig up the soil, and that's how you got rid of rocks in those days. You built walls with them. Many of them may represent original boundary lines between different people's properties. Some of them are just a way to get rid of the rocks that people had to take out of the soil. So you'll see those all through the property, and they add a lot to the beauty of the woods. Okay, so we are walking on a loop to the left. We're heading more or less toward the railroad tracks, which are in that direction. And we're approaching a rock that is a glacial erratic, not part of a ledge particularly. It's just an individual rock. And this is one of my favorite pieces of Ingram Park because I think it looks like a creature of some sort, a magical creature that lives here. And he doesn't have an official name, although I sometimes think of him as Ozzy, after Osborne Ingram, who donated this, was involved with helping this land become protected through a collaborative effort. And this is the view where you can really see the face in the rock. And it's also the site of a quest clue that Katie will tell us a little more about.
It's a fundraising opportunity, naming that.
So we'd like to give you a little bit of the history of how we came to acquire this property. This entire property was owned by Osborne Ingram, and he had an interest in trying to protect it while also receiving some money from the purchase. So this was a collaborative effort between the Cohasset Conservation Trust and the Cohasset Land Foundation originally, with money from the Community Preservation Committee for a second purchase. But in 2007, the Cohasset Conservation Trust acquired 21.6 acres of the land from the Cohasset Land Foundation, and their model was to acquire a large piece of property like this that had some parts that were suitable for development, to sell those parcels off for development, to realize some money for the transaction, and then to protect the surrounding land. So a little further down Beechwood Street, there's a driveway, and there are 3 houses that were developed to help support this project. And then the rest of the land was protected mostly in 2007, and there was one parcel above those lots that was held for a few more years with the idea that it might be needed by the town for some purpose, but in the end the the town decided it really didn't need it, and so that was a 5.8 acre parcel, which we acquired again from the Land Foundation in 2014, and that was with financial assistance from the Community Preservation Committee. And their name, we're working on an effort to add that to some of the signage so that people are aware that they also participated in this. And as I mentioned before, it's been a real community effort. So the Boy Scouts have been hugely helpful in developing the trails, planning the trails, getting us over the wetlands with boardwalks. The trust itself has marked the trails with the orange blazes that you'll see, that's a continuing effort to replace those occasionally. And I think use by the public has increased recently because it does go, there are several streets to the left of the property, and then across the top, many of the houses on Ledgewood Drive, which is that neighborhood off Brewster Road, at the top of Brewster Road, they're right up against this property too. So there's several neighborhoods that can access the property by foot and enjoy it, and we're happy to see it being used more, and hope that through efforts like this that more of you will discover it and come here and appreciate it.
And we've made a quest as a way to get more people to enjoy this property, get kids in the woods. It's so relaxing here. You can really take a breath and just feel your worries fade away. The quest is one of 12 in quests around the South Shore. There's 4 in Cohasset, and it's in this book. It's for $5. It's for sale at Buttonwood Books and Holly Hill Farm, and the rec department office is selling it. And our table at the farmers market, every 2 weeks we have a table at the farmers market, and we have the quest brochures available there for sale. And so it's basically a treasure hunt where you follow clues that tell you about the stories and secrets that make that place really special. And then we added in some fairies for extra fun. And here, next to this fabulous rock, is one of the boulder elf. And the door, if you come in, you can see that the older elf has made a nice little home here in this place. And so I am one of the stewards of this property, and we're always looking for more stewards if anybody is interested. It's a great place to hang out.
So if you're a neighbor or you live in this vicinity and you'd like to help us with efforts to maintain the property, please get in touch. We have a website. All our stewards are listed with phone numbers. We have a Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love help.
Okay.
So what is a quest? A quest is a treasure hunt, and there's a variety. Some go through woods, some go through the farm, even there's one in a cemetery in Cohasset, and you follow clues that tell you kind of the secret stories of a place, the history, and then at the end, if you get all the clues, then it tells you the secret location of the treasure box. And there's a little treasure box with a stamp and a notepad, and the kids really seem to love it.
So this is just an example of something you might see at this particular time of year. These are mushrooms, and they're actually really beautiful. I've taken a lot of pictures of them. There's a smaller one here. I'm not sure I can tell you whether are these chicken in the woods?
It's a type of fungi. I'm not sure if it's chicken in the woods. That's a very common fungi in the woods that you find that's edible, but as a rule of thumb, it's best never to
eat.
to try to eat a fungi. It's so pretty.
You know, from the middle to late summer, you may just see something like this along the trail.
What is this?
Well, we don't know. It's clearly the foundation of something. It could have been an animal shed or barn of some sort. I don't think it's big enough to have actually been a house, although it's possible. But it's a foundation.
I'd like to ask, we could feature it if you want to do
Sure.
like a,
Yeah.
you can weave another way to interact with nature and play is to enjoy some weaving. You get some sticks together and you can weave them together and make a little fort, or it kind of helps outline the path here, which is great.
We've tried to outline the paths in general
Yeah.
with fallen trees just to keep people's eyes going to the path. Some seasons it's a little harder to see parts of the path than others, but in those sections we've used branches to outline the trail and draw your eye forward.
Okay.
So we're at an intersection here. If you had come in the main trail and not turned left near the Spirit Rock, if you had gone straight, you would have come out here and you could have just done a smaller loop that's in green there.
So here's the loop. We came in off Beachweed Street. We came around here, and we're at one of the only intersections. And if you take the purple, you can go down, and it's all the way over here, and then you can come back. It's about a 20-minute walk all to and back, and then continue on the loop. Let's see if she's home. She's still home. So this is the Beech Tree Fairy, and she's gray because the bark is smooth and gray, and she lives right in there. And I love this fairy door because in the winter an animal had made its little home in there. It was covered in fur, and so somebody had spent the winter in this fairy door, which is fun.
The quest season runs from...
The quest season is from April 15th to November 15th. So that's when.
So this is available through the fall.
Yep.
So this is another area that we're not sure what it is, but it's definitely indicative of some past use of the property. We think it was sort of a roughly paved path of some sort that may have led from someone's house to their farm acreage, or to maybe to that shed where their animals were kept. And in seasons where there's not as much growth, you can see it a little better, but it was here, and we used it as part of the trail system. So there's a lot of little hints of past use of the property.
Oh no.
What?
No.
Oh.
I don't know what else we'll look at. So this is along the trail. What's fun to do, especially with kids, and I enjoy it, is you find what plants smell really good. So this is a plant that smells really good. I think it's shadbush, and if you just take a leaf and you smell it, and it smells so good. And we'll cover some of the other plants that smell good, like sassafras and wintergreen and stuff like that. So.
Okay, so we are now down near toward the end of the property closest to Route 3A, and we have a beautiful little spot here. It's quite elevated. We have a bench, and it's a beautiful view, and it's one of my favorite parts of the park too, because you feel like you could be in a very dense woods anywhere. There is a house over here, but if you look this way, you're looking into very dense forest. And I've been here in the winter, and I've been here in the summer, and it's just a beautiful spot to relax for a minute and forget that you live in a busy life in a busy little town. Very pretty spot. The Vedanta Center is this way. They also acquired some land as part of this project, so there's a buffer before you even get to the Vedanta Center that they own. And that's a pretty quiet parcel too. So this acreage here going down towards Route 3A is very quiet. This is the Cohasset Conservation Trust's Great Booster Woods property. Between this property and an adjacent property called Dean's Meadow, this is 25 acres of wooded land with a very well-developed trail system right in the middle of Cohasset. I hope many of you are already aware of it, but if you're not, it's very accessible. It's mostly right behind Town Hall. We are at the parking area, which is small, at the end of Great Brewster Trail, which is on the way up to St. Stephen's Church. Just take a left right from the edge of the common, and you can park here, or you can park in the town hall parking lot and walk over here. This is the official entrance. If this is our walking trail symbol and our sign, and down here you'll find this, which includes both a trail map of the trails and a detailed trail guide, which tells you about various points of interest along the way, which are marked with numbers. There's some very cool things in here, all listed here. This is available on our website as well. This was a 1985 gift from a corporation called the Great Brewster Corporation, which was a local real estate group and included local residents Edgar Hill, Walter Reelsbach, Raymond Remmick, and George McLaughlin. And you might wonder why it's called Great Brewster Woods. Some of you may have heard of Great Brewster Island, which is one of the Boston Harbor Islands, and there is in fact a connection. Edgar Hill had a mining venture on Great Brewster Island, and so they named their corporation the Great Brewster Corporation, and we've named the property Great Brewster Woods. So that's where the name came from. In 1992, Helen Dean, who owned property at the other end of Great Brewster Woods down near Meadow Lane, donated 7 acres of her property to the Conservation Trust. It was formerly a meadow where they grazed animals in the old days. So between those two, there's 25 acres. And that portion of the property is a little younger growth. You can see that things are growing up over time, but it was a meadow not that long ago. I hope you'll come and walk here. There's a couple of higher vantage points out over Little Harbor and the Marsh before Little Harbor. There's some very interesting trees. There's some beautiful stone walls. People have seen all kinds of wildlife in here, from owls to deer. It's a beautiful place, and as I say, it's right in the middle of town, very accessible, easy to get to, great for kids, and you can it's not a quest right now, although we have had a quest in it in the past, but this guide will give you a lot of information at different stops along the way, so you can get an appreciation for the property and the natural aspects and some of the history of it. So hope you come and enjoy it. So we are standing at the foot of Parker Avenue on the dock across from Bassing Beach, which was the Conservation Trust's first property in 1968. So we're celebrating our 50th year of ownership this year. The CCT was actually founded in 1967. We celebrated that 50th anniversary last year in order to take advantage of the opportunity to acquire Bassing Beach from Parker and Nancy Schofield, who lived just over the border in Scituate. It was officially a purchase. Over 400 townspeople contributed money towards the purchase of Bassing Beach, but it was purchased for a relatively nominal amount from the Schofields. We acquired most of the property in 1968, and then there was a further donation from the Schofields in 1972, so that the CCT owns, it's hard to know exactly how much land because the boundary markers have been more or less obliterated over the years with dredging and flooding and other natural events. But we own roughly 13 to 14 acres of Bassing Beach, which, as you probably know, goes around the corner here and then down to the breakwater, and then beyond the breakwater continues down this way. There are some private landowners out there towards that end, some small holdings, maybe 7 or 8 people that own slices of Bassing Beach. So the setup of Bassing Beach is visible pretty well in these photos that we created for the 50th anniversary celebration. We're looking across at the cottage here, and then the beach continues down this side, a lot of marshland and some small bushes, and then it looks like it, continues down. This is beyond Bassing, back on the mainland. And then on the other side, same thing. Here's the breakwater, and you have beach going down here and all the way down here. So in this picture, and right now, if you look to the right, you see water, and then eventually it becomes green, and that's marsh grass. And if you were to go kayaking right now and go that way, you wouldn't be able to get much beyond the water that you see there. But at very high tides, if you check the tide charts and look for tides that are over about 9.5 feet, you can kayak all the way around Bassing Beach. So you can circumnavigate Bassing Beach by coming here just before the high tide and going this way, and you can go right over the marshes. Okay, well, we hope you enjoyed that tour of, I think, about 12 of our properties around town, and at least one of our conservation restricted properties. We're back now at Garrison Landing, which, as I mentioned, is one of our newer properties, 2017. We do not yet have a sign, but we're actually sitting and standing near the walls, which are the foundation of the old Souther Ice House, which is a very interesting building and ice business from the 19th century. We hope to get up a kiosk with some information about the history of the ice house, some photos, and explanation of what that business was. And we just wanted to stress again that now that you've seen some of the properties that we own all over town, perhaps you'll recognize some of them. Perhaps you'll keep an eye out for our green and white signs with the seagull logo in the corner.
We have a lot of new properties over the last 4 years that I think not many people are aware of, so feel free to come check out our website and Facebook, and visit us at the farmers market to find out more about these new properties.
We hope you'll keep in touch, and please feel free to be in touch with any of us. All of our phone numbers are listed on the website if you have questions or want to become more involved with the trust. And thank you all for your past support of our work. We look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much.